Welcome to the Backyard Bouquet Podcast, where stories bloom from local flower fields and home gardens. I'm your host, Jennifer Galizia of The Flowering Farmhouse. I'm a backyard gardener turned flower farmer located in Hood River, Oregon. Join us for heartfelt journeys shared by flower farmers and backyard gardeners. Each episode is like a vibrant garden, cultivating wisdom and joy through flowers. From growing your own backyard garden to supporting your local flower farmer, the Backyard Bouquet is your fertile ground for heartwarming tales and expert cut flower growing advice. All right, flower friends, grab your gardening gloves, garden snips, or your favorite vase because it's time to let your backyard bloom. Flower friends, if you've been dreaming of a greenhouse to extend your growing season, start seeds early, or protect your precious plants, this is your chance. I've been working with Northwest Green Panels for over 6 years, and they've built not one, but 2 incredible greenhouses for me. Their high-quality, custom-built greenhouses are perfect for everyone, from backyard gardeners to full-scale flower farms. And right now, they're offering an exclusive deal just for my listeners, $750 off plus $500 in free accessories, or 5% off your total, whichever is greater. Give them a call and mention the code FARMHOUSE. Find all the details in the show notes and start building your dream greenhouse today. Welcome back to the Backyard Bouquet Podcast. I'm absolutely thrilled about today's guest, Marian Boswall. If you're passionate about gardening, sustainability, and the way landscapes can heal both the earth and our souls, this episode is for you. Marian is an award-winning landscape architect, garden designer, and author known for her expertise in regenerative and sustainable design. As the founder of Marian Boswall Landscape Architects, she has spent decades transforming gardens and landscapes into biodiverse, beautiful, and meaningful spaces that honor both nature and history. She is a fellow of both the Landscape Institute and the Society of Garden Designers, as well as the co-founder of the Sustainable Landscape Foundation. Her new book, The Kindest Garden, is coming out on April 8th, 2025, and I cannot wait to dive into its inspiring message. Today, we're talking about how we can design gardens that are not only stunning, but also deeply connected to the land, fostering biodiversity, sustainability, and a sense of harmony with nature. Marian, welcome to the Backyard Bouquet Podcast. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's lovely to see you.
It's lovely to meet you. I've been looking forward to this episode for a while. As soon as I saw your book, The Kindest Garden, coming out, I just knew that I really wanted to chat with you. So thank you truly for being here today. You are chatting with us from the UK.
Yes, I am. We've got quite a time difference. It's got dark here already and you're still the morning, which is I love the idea that we can be across the world, and because of tech, we can still speak. It's pretty amazing.
Yes, I love it. So to get started, can you share a bit about your journey into landscape architecture? What first drew you to the field?
Yes. So I fell into landscape architecture, really. I gardened as a child, and if I start right at the beginning, when I was 4, I remember sleeping outside in a den with my sister.
Oh.
And I woke up in the middle of the night, a den, a sort of place that we'd made to sleep the night. And I woke up terrified in our garden because it was dark, and I didn't really know how I was going to get there to the house. And as I peeked outside of the den, I saw that my grandmother was sitting there on a chair with a rug over her knees under all these roses. And she'd been sitting there to look after us through the night. And the feeling of her love and protection just filled the whole garden with a completely different atmosphere. And suddenly it became a magical space, a space of scents of roses and the feelings of all the creatures there. And I was able to really feel every single moment of it. And that feeling of love and belonging and something deeper is something that I've tried to reconjure in all of the gardens that I've designed.
That gave me goosebumps. I love that so much that you were 4 years old and there was your grandmother looking over you and protecting you and creating this magical space that literally seeds were sown at that moment that have shaped your entire life.
They really have. And sometimes I think we go back to these. I mean, you asked for my journey. I didn't immediately, know that that's exactly what I wanted to do. I did other things along the way. I studied languages at Oxford. I was a management consultant. I was a buyer. I did other things, but actually it became apparent that the garden was the place for me, and I came back to that. And it has been a solace and a joy, but also a place of great purpose. I feel that if we can garden regeneratively and with the land, then we're doing exactly what we need to be doing, what I need to be doing right now.
It really does feel that way when you are working in harmony with nature. So I love that. What was it that made you make that switch from your career in management and consulting and buying to becoming a landscape designer?
Well, it's a personal story. I'm very happy to share it because I think we all have these moments of extreme pressure, or portals, if you like, that sort of explode us into another life. So I was working very hard as a management consultant, and back in the 80s, I don't know if any of your listeners will remember that long ago, but there weren't very many women in my career, in what I was doing. And I had friends who were day nannies and night nannies and weekend, who had day nannies, night nannies, and weekend nannies. And my second daughter was born early and sadly died. And I think that extraordinary sort of shock, if you like, made me rethink my whole life. I thought, actually, I'm not going to subcontract my whole life to all these nannies. I'm going to go home. And I thought, I'd be a stay-at-home mother, but of course, curiosity gets the best of us. And I began to garden and to love my garden, which I had always done before, and to garden with children as they got bigger. And I got more and more curious about how things were designed and how they should be looked after. And I got deeper and deeper into it until, lo and behold, 20 years later, have a career in a studio and now design large-scale landscapes as well as gardens for other people. So, like many tough things in life, it was a gift.
I want to first just say I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't even imagine how hard that must have been. But the fact that you found the garden and that healing, you returned to something from your childhood is so beautiful. And thank you for that vulnerability and sharing that with us, because I know that so many people have experienced loss, and it's amazing how the garden can become that place of healing for us.
It really is. And I think it's one of those things that we were perhaps brought up to not speak about some of these things, but it's so much easier when we do, and when we share our experiences, but also when we share them with the garden. So these days I would go outside if something was troubling me, and I'd tell the trees, and I would connect with the land. And now I understand how incredibly healing the land is, and the plants. And I mean, I love your job. So flowers, if somebody sends you flowers, is there any better feeling in the world than, I think they call it being bunched, don't they? If somebody sends you some flowers, you just think, wow, someone loves me. But not only does somebody love you, but the flowers themselves are full of all these healing properties, particularly if they're grown without pesticides and without peat and without plastics. But we can get into all of that. But I think the essence of the flower and the way that it is grown has a huge impact on our spirit as well as on our physical being.
I completely agree, which leads me to my next question that I had for you. Your work is deeply rooted in sustainability and regenerative practices. Was there a particular moment or experience that shaped your passion for this approach to gardening?
Well, it's rather lovely in a way, because sometimes you can become fashionable without meaning to. And I started off after I did a landscape architecture degree. So after I started, I had my children and I started looking after a garden. Then I wondered how it should be designed. So I did horticulture, I did garden design, and then landscape architecture. Then I was invited back to teach historic garden conservation. So in the UK, we have lots of ancient, as you know, historic buildings, and their gardens are highly regulated by planning laws. So you have to be very careful how you design and look after them. So there's not much room for ego. So I would be designing in the steps of Capability Brown or Bridgman or one of those amazing great people. So I would be very much linking what I was doing to what had gone before and respecting both the craft and also the planting and what had happened to the land before. So that was really the beginning of what turns out to be a sustainable approach. I was always interested in looking after the plants and the soil, but I only really understood about the impact of looking after the soil when I met Nicole Masters, in fact. And I know that you know who she is. So just before I met Nicole, I had suddenly, somebody had mentioned to me about the properties of soil. And I got her book, For the Love of Soil, and I was listening to it. And
amazing book.
Rewind. It's an amazing book, yeah. And it's even better to listen to it because she reads it herself, which is so special. But she was saying about the microbes, and I remember driving along the motorway and just rewinding and rewinding. What? What is a protozoa? It does what? I mean, it was just a whole new world. And when you realize that that's all going on under the ground, and I never knew it. Now, I did biology at school, but I never knew that link. I don't think any of us really knew that much detail of how important the soil is, and how important it is to the plants. So the plants do this extraordinary alchemy of changing sunlight into food, and to grow nutritious food for us. But then they give up to half of those sugars away to the microbes in the soil in order for the microbes to give them the nutrients, which they then put in the plants, which we then eat. And it's just amazing. And then the way that they speak to one another underground, and these chemical interactions, the way that a mother tree can look after other trees. I know you know all of this, and perhaps many of your listeners do as well. But for me, when I read or listened to and then read Nicole's book, I was just like, I need to meet this woman. I need to know everything she can tell me. And I did the Create course, which is a fantastic program she does, which basically teaches you how to look after soil. It's an agroecology coaching course, but it also teaches you about mindset and how to really challenge the historic mindset that we've had about soil, about plants, but also about weeds, which is very interesting, and how we can kind of make ourselves a lot healthier and happier by working in sync with nature.
So you just sparked a question for me. But first I want to say Nicole's book, I will link to it in today's show notes, For the Love of Soil. I listened to it on audiobook also. I'm pretty sure I listened to it 2 or 3 times last summer because there's so much good information to absorb and soak in. And with our new field, I'm so curious to really dive into the soil health with our new farm. You mentioned, though, in this course you took that there's a portion on the weeds. Is it to get rid of the weeds or is it to help them?
No. So as Nicole says, weeds should be renamed as the doctors of the soil. So the portion that we were talking about, and that I also talk about in my book, is that when you're looking at a garden, really the first thing I do as a designer as well, I'm looking at the layout and the energy and how it works with all the different aspects. But if we're diving straight into growing, then you're looking at what's there already. So what is growing there and what are they indicating to us? So some weeds will be telling us that we have compacted soil, for example, and they will be doing an extraordinary root. So some things will have like a dandelion, will have a long taproot, for example, which is breaking up that compaction and is doing an amazing job at being the doctor of the soil. So, and then some other sort of more creeping things like a chickweed, for example, might show us that we've got a very rich, fertile soil. And others might be telling us, like a horsetail, that we've got poor drained or high acidic soil. So by seeing what's there already, we can work with it. And we can either work with the weed, or if we want to get rid, for example, of the weed, then what we need to do is to apply what the weed is bringing up. So let's say, for example, if it's heavily compacted, what does that mean? So if it's ground elder, if it's nettles, for example, it might mean that it's bringing up calcium. So what can you do then? You could apply, and maybe the same for knapweed, you can apply a very dilute milk solution, or you could apply eggshells, ground eggshells, which have been soaked in cider vinegar, these sorts of things, which then release the calcium which these plants are bringing up. So then you don't need them anymore, and then the plant themselves will no longer need to be there, so it'll go. So they do this wonderful thing of really telling us what's happening, and so that we can work with them. And of course, then they're also good for us. So nettles are fabulous to add to water for our own health. As is cleaver, which is something which we have a lot of just coming up just now, which is a great time in spring to clean out our system. So we can add those to water or to a tea to drink. So yes, the weeds are brilliant indicators and don't need to be got rid of completely. Obviously, if you're growing flowers, then you don't want them in your exact spot where you want the flower, but they can be in the paths, they can be nearby. And then perhaps you just cut them off before they flower, so that the goodness stays in the soil and doesn't go into the seeding.
Absolutely. I love what you just said, because I've had multiple people out to our new farm, and everyone's response is, you're going to need some chemicals. You're going to have to spray these. And I keep saying, no, I'm not going to. I'm like, I've read Nicole's book, and I've spoken with her a couple of times. She was actually in New Zealand at the same time I was. And I was so bummed because she was doing a soil health conference, and I could have attended had I known in advance. So I reached out to her and I was like, I just need to get you on the podcast. So it's in the works, hopefully later this year, because she's such a wealth of knowledge, just like yourself. But I keep saying, no, I know in this book that these weeds are serving a purpose. I'm not going to throw chemicals down on this land.
And I think Charles Dowding is another wonderful person to listen to and talk to. He has the whole no dig methodology, and he would have you put down cardboard and wood chip, or cardboard and compost, which is something which we also do. And the wood chip, of course, will raise your fungal levels, and so will help the soil from that point of view. So wood chip paths are amazing between growing areas as well for increasing fungal levels and soil moisture, locking up carbon, all these, just getting there. And of course, getting the balance right. And of course, doing your own compost is another fantastic thing to do.
So you personally advocate for regenerative gardening rather than just sustainable gardening. Can you help us understand the difference and why it is so important?
Yes. So I think that every garden might seem small, but actually we each have a pivotal role in our sort of regeneration of the earth. And obviously my first book was called Sustainable Garden. So why have I written another one? Because I think this is the next step. So sustainability is about not doing any more harm, whereas regeneration is about really learning to work with nature. We are nature. So how can we be in harmony with ourselves as well as with the land? And I think the regeneration is about putting back. So it's about a syntropic relationship rather than an entropic relationship. It's about having a purpose. Personally, for me, it's about having a purpose, and it's about thinking about how I can do the most good in terms of the soil, but also in terms of my life in general. And how can we regenerate ourselves? I think a lot of us are running on empty, even if we're doing the most beautifully thoughtful career. It might be that we're giving so much that we burn out, and so many people are burnt out. People spend too much time on screens or on social media, or in thinking we're not good enough, or in comparing ourselves to other people. Whereas really, to love yourself has to be the beginning of regeneration. If we could just be kind to ourselves, and I think the reason for writing the book called The Kindest Garden was that if you can grow a garden, it might just be the kindest thing you can do for yourself. And the title was inspired by a great friend of mine, Sophie Neville, who's a psychotherapist, amongst other things. And she would ask a client, what's the kindest thing you can say to yourself? And so this is an extension of that. What's the kindest thing you could do for yourself? And really, if nature is an extension of ourselves, then if we can be kind to ourselves and blur the boundaries between us and our gardens, then we can blur the boundaries between our gardens and the rest of the world. Once we understand how food is grown and we start to take care of our own little patch, once we understand all the creatures that come to visit our garden and learn how to love them, by extension, we're going to want to look after the rest of the creatures in the world as well. So I think it's a way of starting small to do something really big.
I love that so much. That's such a beautiful concept. And I really think that people are hungry for that right now. You talk about people running themselves dry. And I think this is perfect time of year because a lot of our listeners are gardeners or flower farmers. And so this is a busy time of year where there is a lot happening and a lot of people's cups feel empty already as they're starting out the season with so much going on in the news. I heard a word earlier today and now it's leaving my mind, but it's basically talking about mindless scrolling, how we're just spending so much time tuning things out when instead we could be doing something like what you're saying and going out and getting our hands in the soil and feeling connected again.
They say that you should spend 20 minutes with your hands in the soil, and if you're too busy, you should spend longer.
Ooh, I like that.
Yes, because you feel so good, don't you? I mean, I do something called Qigong, which is a lovely practice outside. It's only just warm enough to do it outside now. We have been very frosty recently. But it's a lovely mindful practice. It's a bit like tantric yoga or Tai Chi type thing, and it's there's a little picture of it, and there's some website, not me teaching it, but other people teaching it in the back of the book. But all those sorts of mindful, quiet, bringing yourself to pause, it's so useful. And I think the extraordinary thing is that we think sometimes we're wasting time when we stop. But it's a bit like a page which is scribbled all over. If you can just rub out a little corner and make a bit of space by clearing your mind, then there's so much more room for everything else. And Nia, who's a lovely person on the Create course, gave me a great gift when she said to me, Marian, rather than asking if you've done enough to rest, ask yourself if you've rested enough to do what you need to do. And I think I've really taken that, particularly at weekends when I'm minded to, go and do this, go and do that. I think actually, no, I'm resting. Yes, which is a funny concept, isn't it? Resting. And we all think that perhaps we shouldn't do it unless it's for 7 or 8 hours in bed, but actually resting during the day, which is not looking at a telephone or a television or radio. It's actually just being at rest in nature it's a real gift.
That's so great. That's something that I've been learning this last year is I had a coach who asked me when we lost our last growing space that we'd been leasing, and it was a lot of work to clear it out. She said, well, how are you going to recover afterwards? What are you going to do for your body? And I had never had that mindset before. It was kind of like, well, I'm just going to go on to the next thing. And she's like, no, your body needs to recover before you can go on to the next thing. And so we ended up at the end of this last growing season, we took a trip as a family and we spent time hiking and visiting places that we'd been wanting to go that was on our bucket list. And I came back so much more recharged. And it was the first time I've taken a trip where I even said to my husband, I'm like, none of us got sick after this trip because we truly let our bodies recover. So I love that you just said that.
And it's that kindness, isn't it? You are kind to yourself. And then your body learns to trust. Because I think that's the other thing. We have to teach our bodies to trust them. I used to think that my mind was dragging my body out to play sometimes when I got really tired. It's like, come on, oh no, I need to rest. But actually, if our bodies learn to trust that there will be rest, then they don't get sick. It's just like all the microbes inside our tummies are so similar to the microbes in the soil. And if we can feed them what they want and look after them, then we don't get sick.
Absolutely. Okay. I love this idea of being kind to ourselves. How does someone listening get started with this?
With being kind to themselves.
And incorporating the garden piece of it, of course.
Yes. Well, it depends how interested they are in things like meditation. So I'll give you a very practical way to be kind to it, and then I'll give you a more meditative way, if you like.
Yes.
The practical way of being kind to yourself, I would say, is ways to ditch guilt. So we all carry guilt, particularly, well, I can't really speak for the male population because I'm not male, but it's quite a feminine thing to do to carry guilt and multitask. So I like to stop feeling guilty about food by composting and by feeding the earth. So if we have to waste food, and sometimes we do because we bought too much, it feels fantastic to put it in a wormery or a bokashi bin and create a compost pile and hot compost or Johnson Sue, which I show how to do in the book, but I'm sure many people will have other ways, but it's a really fast, effective way. Then you're giving back to the land. You're creating a closed loop system. You're not paying for a rubbish truck to take it away, compost it and bring it back, or take it away and put it into landfill. So that, for me, just makes me feel great. Obviously, it's a shame if you've bought some lovely food and cooked it, not to eat it, but sometimes that's what happens. The other thing would be to only buy really nutritious food. So I know Dan Quittridge is doing amazing work with looking at high density nutrition for food, high nutrient density, if you like. But if we can buy food which is either organic or pesticide, less pesticides or pesticide free, and which is grown to avoid peat, microplastics, all those things. And if the pigs, there's a lovely book called The Marvelous Pigginess of Pigs. Do you know it? It's all about allowing animals to express themselves and to be the animals they'd like to be. So not keep them in those horrible big food lots if you're going to eat meat. So I think those things, if we put into our bodies beautiful things, we're going to feel that we've really taken care of ourselves. So I think those are how I would be kind to myself in my garden in a practical way. So what I'm putting into my body, and then in the garden itself, it would be to make sure that I have places for insects to forage and to live. So it's great to have flowers, but they also, the pollinators also need to have places to live. So old tree stumps or areas of brash or mess, if you like, a little bit messy, so that pollinators can live there. And to think not only of honeybees, but in the UK we have 270 different species of bees. I don't know how many you have in the States.
Wow.
But we have tiny, tiny bees as well as big bumblebees. So looking after all of those. And that means avoiding neonicotinoids and avoiding spraying. And yes, then looking after the birds. So, and on it goes. So creating dead hedges so you can have mammals, bringing in the owls as your pest control, bringing in the birds as your pest control for aphids. And then making sure you have water so that you're changing the ecosystem and you're allowing the creatures somewhere to live. And once you've got an ecosystem, it's amazing how all the pests disappear. So you don't then have an aphid problem, you don't have a slug problem, all those sorts of things, because somebody is eating each of them. So that's the very physical way I would say I would start to be kind to the garden.
I love those.
If there was a more, if I've got time, have I got time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
A more spiritual, if you like, way of being kind to oneself and to the garden, it would be to connect. And then you actually don't need to do any gardening at all. And this is a beautiful practice to do before your gardening day, really. It's a bit like the thinking meditation, in that you would walk outside, but rather than walking outside compiling a to-do list, which we're all quite capable of, particularly you can see a garden and it can just always fill you with guilt. You can think, oh, I should have done this, I should have pruned those, I should have cut this, all those sorts of things, rather than filling yourselves with shoulda, coulda, and to-do lists, just to appreciate the extraordinary beauty that's there without us. And I love to go outside and notice how the birds are there without me having invited them. I mean, obviously I've mentally invited them, but they're just there doing their own thing. And how the insects are there doing their own thing, and the trees are growing. I mean, now the trees are growing. Nobody's gone out there with a conductor's stick. No human has gone out there and said, okay, trees grow. They know to grow and they know what they're doing. So to go out with that sense of awe and wonder and remember that, because I think we can all get so caught up with the day job, particularly if we've turned our passion into a job, which so many of us do, don't we? I'm sure you became a flower farmer because you love farming and you love flowers, but all of a sudden it became a chore. So it's the same with me, that I need to go outside and remind myself of the extraordinary beauty that has nothing to do with me and does not rely on my to-do lists at all. And I can just enjoy it for free. And I think if we can just enjoy it for free, then we make that amazing connection, which fills us with joy and really is then our fuel to get through the rest of the day and any tricky customers and any tricky, I don't know, silly things like money and all that that we have to deal with.
I look at that as a gratitude mindset. I know with our new farm, we're not living on site yet. And every time I drive down the driveway, it's a long driveway, I'm just in awe. I mean, the scenery, we're in the Columbia River Gorge, which is one of the few national scenic areas in the United States. So we live in a very picturesque spot. But on one side of our property is what's called Middle Mountain. And there are these tall evergreen trees. And then the highway separates the hillside from our farm. And here's this huge open field. And then on the other side is the Hood River. And you can hear it, especially this time of year. We don't have river frontage on our property, but we back up to it. And there's a forest in between. There's an old oak grove forest. And so the animals pass through. So like I'll be working and behind our deer fence, you'll see the deer coming, or there's blue jays that will swoop down from the trees. And we have these huge hawks soaring overhead. And just as we're getting started, and maybe it's because there's nothing there yet with these massive to-do lists, my mind's instantly going to look at this beauty that we're surrounded with. And it just sets that tone for what you're talking about, of just feeling so good about what you get to do.
Isn't that beautiful? I love that. And bringing that energy in. So I think when I'm designing spaces, I'm looking to those sorts of energetics outside, and I wouldn't be inviting the deers to come and eat my roses, but I would be inviting the deer energy and the mountain energy and the tree energy to support my land. So it's the same, really, from what you're saying. It's the gratitude, and then how can you support the amazing gifts which are already there? How lovely.
That is so amazing. So tell me, how do you balance the aesthetics of building a garden or a farm with the ecological responsibility that comes with designing the garden? or the space, the land?
Yeah, I think beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And I always say, I love the F. Scott Fitzgerald quotation. She was beautiful, but not like the girls in the magazines. And I always think that, I mean, my gardens are very luckily have been photographed for magazines, and that's very lovely. And that's often down to the brilliance of the photographer and the angle that they take the picture. But actually, the beauty is in the feeling when you're there. And you know how you can meet a person and their features might not be construed on their face in a magazine beauty way, but they might have a real inner glow, and you might just meet them and think, oh my word, you are a beautiful person. Sometimes you see sort of old Indian or ethnic, I don't know who they would be, but just photographs of people with really craggy faces, grandmothers from anywhere really. And you just think, wow, you are a beautiful person. It just shines through. So I think in a garden, that energy of the garden being loved, the people there that are looking after it, and the energy of that land can just shine through. In the same way, sadly, if there's a land is traumatized and bad things have happened there, sometimes you can arrive somewhere and you can think, oh gosh, this feels like an uncomfortable place to be. So I think those sorts of energies can exist. So if I am designing a garden, I'm looking to work with the strengths that are there and to support them. And this is really quite a biodynamic approach. So Jean-Michel Florian, who's an amazing guy from the Goffen Institute, he is the Biodynamic Institute. He talks about the support that you give to the strong energies. And that's what we do. So we would walk around a site and we could say, okay, for example, like the mountains, you have the trees, you have the river, you have the creatures, and then you might have a blank canvas. So in that blank canvas, how are you going to draw those energies in? And it might be in the shape of what you put on the ground. It might be in facing the mountain with your pathways, working towards them, emulating the river. So you're of that place. What you're not going to do is put down a great big square of astroturf and, some, well, I won't say what you're not going to do because I don't want to go there. I don't want to spend my energy on that. But, and then you'll look at the natural flow. So where does the wind come from? Where are the underground sources of water, if there are any? When do you get rainfall? Where's the sun rise? Where does the sun go down? How much sun do you have? How much topsoil do you have? How much work? What's the type of geology below you? So all of those things make for a healthy garden. And then really the aesthetics come from that. I mean, obviously, when I'm designing, I say obviously, maybe it isn't obvious. When I'm designing, I will always design in layers. So I would always have a ground cover to look after the soil. It could be a mulch or it would be a growing ground cover, which would be better because you get the roots in. So maybe a clover or something like that which fixes nitrogen as well, but something as a ground cover. And then I would plant my first layer through that. Then I would have an emergent layer, the interesting things which come up now and then, so pop up like a symphony through the year. And then I would have the shrub layer, which hold the structure through the year and provide perching places for insects and for birds. And then a taller tree layer, which if I was growing flowers might not be in the middle of the field, but they'd be nearby so that we're having the underground mycorrhizal network going and holding onto the water, holding onto the carbon. So always in those layers, and always really mindful of how the roots work together as well. So there's what you can see above ground, then there's what you can see below ground. So making sure you have complementary root structures, some tap roots, some sideways roots, some mat roots, so that the different plants can be getting different nutrients from different places.
That is such great advice. And I didn't even think about the root system, which I totally should have, because we have this whole underground network below. Gosh, I wish you could just come and help me design our farm.
Oh,
I
no.
love what you're
You're doing
saying.
very well. I'm sure you'll be fine. Yeah. And the water, of course, water, very important. Mm.
We have so much water on our property right now.
Oh, do you?
Um,
Really?
because of the hillside, and then our property is about 1,200 feet long, and there's an 80-foot slope, so it's a pretty gradual slope, but because the soil is so compacted and it's been fallow for so many years, water just sloughs off. It finds the easiest path down to the river, because right after our property, there's about a 100-foot drop down to the river.
Wow.
And we have a creek, but the creek meanders some of the water and captures some of it. But right now, so much of the water is just sloughing off the property. So we're looking at, what I love about this is we're looking at, because we have 20 acres, we don't want to farm 20 acres. So we want to have space that we farm, but we want to have these regenerative gardens intermixed throughout the farm. And
How
I
lovely.
love
So
these
some
ideas.
scrapes. You'll be digging some, because all of that sloughing off is stealing your topsoil, isn't it? Sending it
Oh,
down the river to somebody else.
yes. I'm not sure we have any topsoil left on our land.
Well, then you'll be composting.
Yes, we will be. And it's
But
so
yes,
expensive, we'll be doing
great.
our own.
Scrapes and ponds and channels. I mean, we try to return a lot of water down to the aquifers, but whilst you have that compaction, it's not going to get down. I'm on heavy clay, so the amazing thing about that is it cracks in the summer, and isn't that incredible that that's nature's way of getting the water down as quickly as possible to the roots once it rains.
Yes.
Yeah, amazing. But yes, we, on other land for clients, we always would dig scrapes and ponds. Yeah.
Yes, we've dug out 7 contour lines. So we've gone along the contour lines of the earth, and we have water in one section that we're restoring a native habitat. And so we have the water redirecting back to the creek. And it's amazing how much the creek is now flowing because of this area that we're redirecting the water to.
Oh, beautiful. Well, I'd love to come just to see.
Please, anytime. We would love to have you.
That'd be fun.
I'd love to know, what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about creating a sustainable or regenerative garden?
I think it's about control. I think people are afraid of losing control, and that it will be too messy for them. I know there's an issue in the UK with the rewilding. People say, rewilding, you're going to bring in ragwort and it's going to kill my horses, things like that. But I would say that working sustainably, regeneratively, rewilding, it's a sliding scale, if you like, and we only each need to go as far as we're comfortable. And some people's tidiness threshold is much closer to very tidy than others. So I think if you are a very tidy person, you'll find it extremely difficult not to have a striped lawn and not to irrigate your lawn. In which case, I would say have a smaller patch of lawn. Don't fertilize it or use pesticides, but if you need to irrigate it, make sure that you're going to use rainwater only, not mains water, which has been treated. And yes, all of those reasons. And let it grow. We have this thing called no mow May in the UK, but let it grow sometimes so that you can allow pollinators, but also let the sides grow. Let it be a bit shaggy around the sides, or have some wildflower patches or squares. Or if you're very tidy as well, I think it can be fun to have like a chessboard, a checkerboard, and have some bits longer, some bits shorter, so it feels comfortable. Doesn't feel wild, but you're coexisting with nature. So I think that's some people's misconceptions and worries are about letting go and never being able to get it back. And I think they feel like it would make more work if they don't keep on top of it. So they probably think, well, somebody said to me, but if I don't have the sheep in that field, won't it just go straight to scrub? And then how am I going to get it back? So then people are sort of seeing future work. I think things like that are what people are mostly afraid of. Those I would say would be the misconceptions. and that it has to be all or nothing. Really, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. We can take the minimum steps, which would be to avoid poisons because they go into our guts and our children breathe in, and we get many more illnesses because of that. So poisons are number one, which includes pesticides, insecticides, glyphosate, those sorts of things. Try to avoid plastics because those go into the soil and then into our guts. Same issue. Try to avoid peat. I don't know if people use peat in the States. Is that a thing?
Peat moss is still pretty widely used in the States.
Yeah. So to avoid that, because it takes longer to create than it takes then we can replenish it. Yeah. So those would be the sort of starting points. And after that, think about your water. And really, then you can carry on having a smart lawn and a smart house and smart garden if smart is your idea of comfortable. But I also think not worrying about what other people are saying is the biggest key to freedom. So whilst I love having my gardens in magazines, I don't think any of us should listen to magazine to-do lists and magazine pictures. And it's a bit like when you look at models. And I'd love to look at those models, but it's not going to make me happy. It's not going to make anybody else love me more if I look like a model. And it's not going to make me love my garden anymore if my garden looks like a model's garden or a model garden. So I think coming to terms with that is a very kind thing to ourselves.
Oh, that's such good advice. You made me think of the quote, comparison is the thief of joy.
Yes, you're right.
And when we start comparing our gardens, it takes the joy out of them. We've spoken a lot about kindness, and your new book, The Kindest Garden, comes out this April. Can you tell us about the inspiration behind this and what we can expect inside your book?
Yes, so the inspiration was, they say that you should write the book you want to read. And when I started on many, many facets of journey, really, the spiritual journey, I was fascinated by soil, what soil means to us in a very deep atavistic way, not just physically, but how we can look after it. I was really interested by that. I was also very interested by the regenerative movement in the UK. And we have some wonderful people like Andy Cato from Wild Farmed and so on, who are trying to show that we can grow at scale without poisons and how we can really look after our food. And I wanted to apply that back, some of those lessons back to the smaller scale. So I'm an agroecology coach. And so when I looked at how large scale wheat was grown, I was shocked. So then how do we peel that back to the garden and think how that can work? So that was the inspiration, really. It was to say there are amazing things going on, some very forward-thinking farmers, rewilders. Obviously, we have the organic movement as well. And yet we had been lagging behind a bit in the garden because people are still killing slugs. They're still putting down pellets, which can hurt other wildlife as well. They're still using peats and so on. How can we put back in the same way? Because there's so many of us. There's 33.5 million gardeners in the UK. I have no idea how many in the States. It'd be, many, many more. But we are really impactful. And gardeners are really good people. So it seemed like the low-hanging fruit, really, to speak to the gardeners first. It's like, hey, guys, we can do this. We can have a real impact in the way we look after ourselves, our families, our own backyards, and then the impact that we have in our buying power. We could really change things. And that made me really excited.
Well, I love that as gardeners and farmers, especially the flower farmers and cut flower gardeners that are listening to this podcast, it's not just making a difference, but it's adding beauty to the world as well.
Yes, and a beauty which is more than skin deep. Because if you're given a rose which has been grown under, in a hot house with a load of sprays and so on, it's not the same as being given something which has been grown with love in a way that's put back into the soil, that's looked after the creatures that have landed on it and fed it from its nectar and then you're being given this amazing piece of power. And it's amazing because it comes from the sun. And that is the miracle, isn't it? That all of this energy comes from the sun. And it's extraordinary. I love sunrises. It's extraordinary that the sun comes up every day. I mean, wow.
It's all such a miracle. In today's fast-paced world, we often forget to pause and appreciate that beauty or those sunrises. And we've talked a lot about kindness. How do you see our gardens as places of kindness that go beyond just nature and ourselves, but also our communities?
Yeah, I think the way that we can share and build community is a huge thing. And seeds, I think, and gardeners are very generous people. We're generous with knowledge. We're generous with sharing our food, our produce, things have been picked. We're also generous with seed saving, and seed sovereignty is a big thing over here. And I know as well with you. In fact, in Oregon, just recently, there was a whole seed program, and my great friend Holly Sylvester, also from the Create program, was over. So I know that you have a fabulous movement over there. But how can we save seed and use seed in an empowered way? That's a great community builder, and also to volunteer, to have events together, to plant trees together. We also have a lovely thing in the UK where you can buy like a cherry tree, but it's on a farm, but then you can go and picnic underneath it and pick the cherries, which is a wonderful thing. Yeah. So I really like
that.
Also sharing knowledge. So one of the things which I talk about in the book is measuring our impact. And I think that's been a huge swell sea change over here and in the States, which is understanding how you can measure things like bricks, which is less, I don't know if it's less important for flowers. I know it's important for fruit and vegetables, maybe for flowers as well, but it shows how healthy your plant is. And so then you know if you need to apply more compost or those sorts of things. So yes, measuring our impact, I think that's a great way of building community by talking about it and getting together. And it's a lovely practical thing. There's a lot of chat and worry about what is happening on a really big scale and what politicians are doing. But actually, if we can talk about what we are doing as a community and as a family and come back to that local level, then I think we can feel much kind of safer really in the world.
Oh, that's such great advice. I love that these are things that you talk about in your book, The Kindest Garden. What are some of the principles that gardeners at any level can apply to their own spaces that they'll learn from your book?
Well, gosh, lots of principles. I think, we touched on a few of them. So water, we started with. Water, looking after water, reducing mains water use, harvesting rainwater, slowing the flow, we talked about and also for our own guts. So our water has chlorine and chloramine in it. So if we can filter water, that's a great way of making sure that doesn't get into our guts. Using permeable hard surfaces rather than tarmac, so that the water can get back into the aquifer rather than run off, as you've talked about. Soil recycling on site, using bokashi, using no-dig approach. Avoid compacting soil with heavy machinery. Keep the carbon and the nutrients in the soil, lock up the carbon. That helps with, obviously, the greenhouse. Using the layered planting. So we talked about how to plant for your situation. And it probably does work for flower farmers as well, although there must be a little bit about what people want to buy. But also I think perhaps educating people as to what is growing and in season and what they should want to buy. Having climate resilient planting, which can withstand drought and downpours. Sourcing materials responsibly, perhaps less important for flower farming, but if you are creating landscapes, sourcing things which are FSC registered if they are wood, so carefully forested, or if they are stone, making sure it hasn't come from too far away, because of course all the carbon footprint is usually in travel, making sure it hasn't been created with child labour, which can happen. Loads of lovely things for ecology. But on pollution and energy, things like avoiding leaf blowers and using a rake, and it's really good for our bodies as well, things like that. And then using your integrated pest control. So by the time you've got your ecosystem going, you don't need to spray, because you'll have a whole host of creatures who are working with you. I think of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, when you have her going along the road and all the creatures are flying up with her. I think you go in the garden and all the creatures are there helping you to garden. So I think that is a lovely image, that you're working alongside all those other natural things. And finally, yourself. So looking after yourself, allowing time for rest, and allowing time to be kind to yourself, and knowing that you are enough and your garden is enough. And the microbes that work with us are enough.
Wow. That is so much valuable advice that we can find inside your book, especially as climate change continues to be a topic for all of us that we all must address and face. It just sounds like there's so much in your book that can help us make small steps and small changes in our backyards and in our farms. And I can't wait to get a copy of your book. I'm curious. You have wrapped up this book. It's about to be available for the mainstream for all of us to get our hands on. What's next? What projects are on the horizon for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I maybe a bit of rest.
That's a good one.
A bit of rest. I am talking, so I'm sharing. The reason for writing the book was to share the messages in it. So that is, I'm so pleased that it has been incredibly well received so far, and very kind words by Isabella Tree and Satish Kumar and gardeners and so on. So I'm really grateful to that. So a bit of rest, lots of speaking. And I'm also working on a large-scale nature recovery project in the UK, where we're linking lots of land with nature corridors to allow farmers to link together to ensure that everything they can do on their own little plot is then linked to the next plot and the next plot, so that creatures have somewhere to go after their own area. So that's really exciting, because that's after you've been kind to yourself, kind to your garden, kind to your farm, then you're kind of kind to your county. If you see what I mean, it gets bigger and bigger.
That's for the animals or for the farmers?
Well, both. But yes, the idea is it's nature recovery for the animals. So yes, so for the insects, the birds. So for example, how can we increase hedgerows? How can we have contiguous hedgerow and contiguous areas of woodland, so that the worst thing would be if the animal has to cross the highway. Is there some way of helping them to get across the highway, or to make sure that it's not too, like 50 meters, I think is the maximum. So is that 5 times 3, 150 feet is about the max that a small creature can go in the open. So how can we do all of that linking up so that we can, yes, have nature recovery on a larger scale?
Oh, that is amazing. We have a grant application in right now to put in a wildlife corridor on our property. So I love that you're doing that. Yes, we are part of a huge wildlife corridor because we have the river and the mountain. And so prior to our farm, the animals would cross through our property because there wasn't any fencing. And we didn't know that at the time. So now we're trying to solve that and make it accessible for the elk and deer and coyotes and cougars and bobcats and everything to be able to cross safely, because we are on a major highway. So
fabulous. And you have such more exciting animals than us. We don't have bobcats or cougars or anything like that. It's brilliant.
Well, I'd be really happy if we didn't. Always kind of looking around and wonder of the deer, or of awe of them, but always thinking, I really hope there's not a cougar out there.
Oh, yes, but I suppose it's all natural, isn't it? So you need the cougar, so you don't have too many deer. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Wow. This has been such a wonderful conversation with you. I have so many more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. So maybe what I can do is leave the door open to have you back on the podcast again at a later date.
But you're very kind, and I loved speaking to you. Yes, of course, I would come back. And when you come to England, then you must come and have a look at some of the things we're doing here, and vice versa.
That would be a dream. I would love to do that. Before we say goodbye today, I do have a couple quick questions for you. The first one maybe isn't quite as quick, but that is, what do you hope people take away from your book?
I hope that they take away a bit of inspiration, a bit of hope, and some unanswered questions that they would like to explore themselves. Because I think we all thrive on curiosity. And I think if the books spark some curiosity as well as inspiration and hope, then there'll be all those lovely rabbit holes that people can go down, just as I did when I was writing it.
I love that. I had an opportunity, thanks to you, to look through your book, and I definitely have my own little rabbit holes and ideas that are spinning around in my head now. So I'm so excited to get my hands on a physical copy of your book. And thank you for writing this book for all of us. You have put so much kindness out into the world. And I know that so many of my listeners are going to want to get their hands on your book and to follow you. So can you share, where can we find you? And how do we get a copy of your book?
So the book is online, and I think, do you have an equivalent like bookstore.org where people can buy and the money goes to independent bookshops?
We do.
Yeah.
I will link to that.
That's great. So, and it's online in all the usual places other than that. What was the other question? Oh, yes. Where can they follow me? So I'm on Instagram. I'm not really on the other ones. And on Instagram, I'm just at Marian Boswall. And my studio is at Marian Boswall Studio. And if people are private, I'm always a little bit reluctant to follow them back in case they don't want me to. So they need to wave and ask me to follow them back if they're private people.
Gotcha. Perfect. Well, I will include show links to both of your Instagram handles so that people can follow the work that you are doing. This has been such a delight. Marian, thank you so much for taking time this evening to chat with me and talk about your connection to the garden and being kind to ourselves and to nature. This is really an exciting time to be growing, our audience growing flowers, but anyone working in the soil and getting our hands. I think there's so much healing of the earth that we can do right now. So thank you for having this amazing conversation with me.
Well, thank you. I really look forward to hearing how your farm develops and to following that as well on social media. That would be lovely. And I agree, it's a very exciting time to be alive. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll talk to you again soon, I hope. If you've been thinking about adding a greenhouse to your garden, there's no better time. Northwest Green Panels builds top quality, custom greenhouses to fit your growing needs. I love mine, and I know you will too. And as a listener of the Backyard Bouquet podcast, you get an exclusive offer, $750 off, plus $500 in free accessories, or 5% off your total. Whichever is greater, just mention farmhouse to claim your savings. Check out the show notes for all the details and don't miss out on this amazing deal. Thank you, flower friends, for joining us on another episode of the Backyard Bouquet. I hope you've enjoyed the inspiring stories and valuable gardening insights we've shared today. Whether you're cultivating your own backyard blooms or supporting your local flower farmer, you're contributing to the local flower movement. And we're so happy to have you growing with us. If you'd like to stay connected and continue this blossoming journey with local flowers, don't forget to subscribe to the Backyard Bouquet podcast. I'd be so grateful if you would take a moment to leave us a review of this episode. And finally, please share this episode with your garden friends. Until next time, keep growing, keep blooming, and remember that every bouquet starts right here in the backyard.